has prepared a beautiful resource for us here, and it includes some profiles. So I'll just introduce our panelists for us. So as we've just heard from Hilda Halkyard-Harawira, no Ngāti Haua ki Te Rarawa, Te Aupōuri, Ngāti Whātua and Te Moana Nui a Kiwa. Ooh, I like that. I'm going to add that to my bio. Was born in Mango Nui and raised in Otara. As a founding member of the Pacific People's Anti-Nuclear Action Committee in 1980 and the secretary of the Nuclear-Free and Independent Pacific Movement, she co-organised the first Te Hui Oranga o Te Moana Nui a Kiwa in 1982. We also have Hone Harawira, Ngāti Hau, Ngāti Wai, Ngāti Hine, Aupōuri, Ngāpuhi, Ngāti Whātua. And Hone, of course, has been an unwavering voice for change from grassroots movement to Parliament. As the son of Te Whai Harawira, Hone's whakapapa is one of passion, determination and service. He led and participated in the Springbok Tour protests with the Patu Squad, He Taua and Ngā Tamatoa, NFIP and the 2004 Foreshore and Seabed Hikoi. The latter resulted in the formation of the Māori Party and Hone's entrance into central government. And we also have Reverend Dr. George Armstrong, who has spent his life working for peace and social justice. He is an Anglican priest based in Auckland, Aotearoa, and long-serving lecturer at St. John's Theological College. In the 1970s and 1980s, George established and helped to lead the Peace Squadron, a citizens' protest movement that opposed and disrupted the visits of nuclear-armed warships to New Zealand. He was long engaged in the Nuclear-Free and Independent Pacific movement and facilitated funding from the World Council of Churches for many NFIP engagements and trips. Tēnā koutou. I te tuatahi, some of the questions I think you've probably answered for us already with your presentation, Hilda, and the first song that you made us listen to is just so powerful as not just a message of anti-nuclearism, but like a pedagogy in itself, you know, like a way of teaching and educating people about the kaupapa. And, you know, when unemployment is all around, you know, as the starting point. And I wanted to bring that up because, you know, you had mentioned that there were many different movements that you were involved with, many different struggles that people were facing. And I wondered how you were able to kind of connect with people in a way that made them want to connect with that broader movement when there are so many like immediate challenges that people are facing. Like, how were you able to kind of connect people's daily struggle with that broader movement across the Pacific?
I think one of our aims was to bring over international speakers, and they speak directly to regional groups who took that kaupapa on themselves personally and then continued to work in their own areas.
Because that was how you were drawn into the movement yourself, wasn't it? By directly meeting with people from elsewhere in the Pacific.
Yep. Well, I think the 80 conference was powerful in that we had that setting of, you know, people who were involved in the whole struggle. But yeah, I don't want to keep talking. I share the space.
What about you, Reverend Dr. George? How did you get started in the movement?
Well, I got dragged in, really. I mean, when I got married, I married a wonderful woman. Her father was the bishop, who was also my boss. And one of the first times he said to me, he'd watched me, he'd overheard me saying something to one of my fellow priests who didn't have his clerical collar on. And I said to him, don't worry about that. It's not important. The important thing is we're all here together as human beings and all that. Well, Dad, I called him, my father-in-law, was really worried by what I'd said. And he said to me, are you ashamed of your collar? And I burst into tears because he'd misunderstood entirely what he'd overheard. And he didn't know what to say. He was he was a wonderful man, but he was very grave and ecclesiastical. And a great administrator, really. Alan Johnston was his name. And he eventually became Archbishop. So when I got married, that's when I came alive, really, because I didn't want to be alone. That was one of my biggest feelings when I got married, that I didn't want to be alone. And to have a beautiful woman to live with, you know, day in, day out, this was a sort of a dream. Alan Johnston came along and we fell into one another's arms. But
Wow.
the funny thing was, I had to fall into the arms of the Anglican Church as well. But it took me a long time to fall in love with the Anglican Church because it was so bad. It was so lifeless. It was so obviously nearing its end, losing members, lifeless, and so on. What I found out, though, after a while was all the other clergy agreed with me. We were all going downhill. And what were we going to do about it and all that? So we talked a lot about, and I seemed to be studying forever. I mean, you know, I spent years at universities, which didn't do me, it did do me some good. It's doing me some good now, I must say, because I'm really thinking really hard about everything. But what it did was, but I wasn't yet really, I had an evangelical conversion when I was a young man, about 21, but, and that changed my life, there's no doubt about it, and I still respect what happened to me, God knows what, you know. And because I don't see things like that at all anymore, you know. And the thesis I eventually wrote on my doctorate was called Method After the Death of God. Usually, you know, my colleagues would say, "Oh, do you want to write your thesis on, George?" So I'd tell them, and the conversation immediately stopped. No more talk. They didn't even like to ask me what I meant by calling it that, which I didn't do myself. Didn't know myself because at that particular point, the Death of God movement was very strong, and I thought there was quite a lot in it. You know, well, I wasn't really very bothered about it because God for me never was a kind of a big man in the sky or anything like that. You know, in fact, I didn't like using the word because it cheapened it somehow or other. It would be better not to use the word somehow, but I don't know how religion would get on without using that word. That's right. Well, I had all the theories. You know, I knew what was bad and what was good, and I felt it quite deeply and strongly. But it wasn't until we took some banners down in 1968. We took some banners down to the church procession, which was a pretty dead sort of procession that we had on Good Friday. We were studying some stuff for the 3 hours that Jesus was hanging on the cross. That was the idea of using those 3 hours to really try to get at what our faith was about. And we said at the end of the 3 hours, well, we need to do something, you know. I mean, sitting around talking, you know, that's what we're doing all the time, and that's what's wrong because it's not getting us anywhere. So let's go off down into the procession. But let's take some placards with us, saying things like, Jesus died for the Viet Cong. That was an interesting kind of. Now, Christians couldn't disagree with that really because that was part of their idea. They wouldn't necessarily think that the Viet Cong had responded at all. to the fact that Jesus died for them, but Jesus died for them. Jesus died for everybody, didn't he? I mean, that's and the fact that they might respond, that was their fault, so they would go to hell, whereas the others would go to heaven, which is preposterous. Let me say that now, in case you think that I think something like that. I don't think anything like that at all. So we took that banner and took another banner down alongside of another placard that said, Christ died for Anzacs. Oh, yeah. And so these two placards are quite nice to have alongside one another. So we got down to the procession. All these sepulchral people like myself, we all dressed up in cassocks, and black and stuff. So we all looked miserable to the lot. And anyway, Queen Street was dead, on Good Friday. There was hardly anybody about, so nobody watched our procession. and every now and then we'd stop and someone would preach a little sermon, But okay, we turned around the corner. The bishop heard about us with our placards. We were at the back of the procession. And he came down and said, oh, would you please take those placards out? We don't want them there. So I said, well, Bishop, the bishop was actually against the Vietnam War and he was quite outspoken about it, but he didn't want us looking like a protesting rebel, protesters were seen, like we still are seen. But so he said, and I said, no, I'm sorry, Bishop, these students might want to withdraw, but you'll have to ask them yourself. So he had to suffer the indignity of going around each student and asking them to pull out, And so eventually we went, and I said to the bishop, well, I'm sorry if I'm going on. If Jocelyn was here, she'd be stopping me. But we were just going round the corner. I said to the bishop, look, we'll leave a gap between you folks, you pious ones, and us protesting ones. We'll leave a gap between us, so it'll be clear that we don't belong to you and you don't belong to us. And he had to be satisfied with that. But when we went round into Queen Street, the police urged it. They thought we were all part of the same procession, so they made us join up with the rest. And the bishop heard about this and sent the police down to remove us from the procession. And the police insisted that we withdraw from the procession. And I tell you, it took me years to recover from this, to be kicked out of the procession, of our own church procession by our own bishop. I mean, the bishop and I got on great after that. He realised I was onto it, and he really agreed with almost everything I was saying. But and so he backed me, and we worked together very well. His name was Eric Gowing. He was a good man, a nice man.
So was it the protest against the Vietnam War and militarism? And then when did that connect in with nuclear free? Was that kind of around the same time?
Yeah, well, to me, everything was connected up.
Yeah.
Because as far as I could see, what really brought the whole world to a climax, the whole history of the world came to a climax with the dropping of that bomb.
Mm-hmm.
There'd never been anything like that we'd done before. Mm-hmm. And we didn't do it once, we did it twice, and we immediately began to explode these damn things, afterwards to make bigger, better, brighter ones. And of course in the Pacific too, so we could see some of the flashes from down here. So, from there on, I knew what my job was in the church. Be a sort of a prophet, if you like. No, that's too fancy a name for me. But and so I just kept at it. And almost immediately, it must have been a bit later, I met these two. And of course that cemented the whole thing, because I realised, my God, New Zealand, my Pākehā crowd have done this to Maori. And, what are we going to do about that? And my other Pākehā friends felt the same because we sort of tried to build a movement out of that. But then I went off to Princeton and enjoyed 3 luxurious years over there, doing a doctorate amongst the millionaires who all lived about this.
Well, I can see why you got on so well with these two, because Marco and I recently visited with Hilda and Hone and received their records from this period. And we told them about the speaking tour that we're doing, and they said, don't just talk about it, have some action. So I just hear the same kind of tactics and words coming from both of you. But we've talked a little bit about the dropping of those bombs and how that kind of said about the anti-nuclear movement around the world. Hilda and Hone, I was wondering if you could share how where the independent part and what the challenge was from Indigenous Pacific people to the nuclear-free movement. Rock, paper, scissors.
Well, I was really just a soldier in a lot of this. Whatever Hilda wanted me to do, whatever Mum wanted me to do, I did. I noticed when George talking about the church, this Weoranga here was held at Tātai Hono, which is the Māori church up in Kaaba Pass. That Hone Kā, he was the priest there. Hone Kā had a great history in supporting the things we did, often to his detriment as a priest with his flock. Were always very conservative, didn't know why he was hosting things like this. He hosted Bastion Point when we all had to come in, for our court cases. Over a period of months, we all stayed here. I was working there when He Taua happened, when we went up to Auckland University to have a chat to some of those engineering students. Hone Kā had employed myself and my brother during those days, so he was, intimately involved in it. And I loved Hone Kā. He had, even though he was a church man, he could swear like a trooper. Not in church, of course, but he didn't mind taking us aside give us a few words. But and sometimes he didn't understand what we were doing, but he backed us. He backed us because I think he thought that we were trying to do the right thing. So, that's part of that connection with the church. I noticed also some of the other people up here who are gone in their Wirangi Kohu. And just behind her, Papa Joe Hawk, himself, the man, Mr. Ngāti Whātua. Just along from him, Mere Taylor, a good sister of ours, who's also just passed away, Queenie Mihaere, in the middle there. And next to her, Sophie Stockman. Just different ones who have passed on, eh? And just to note that my mum died this year. She was 90. And then a couple of months later, Hilda's mum died. She was also 90. Then a couple of months later, Deepika's mum died. She was also 90. So in terms of the support that we've had from our mums in particular, it's been huge. Eh? So it's a huge passing to lose support of that level. So some wonderful people came through that. I don't see my brother Brian up there, Brian LaPoe, but he's another one. Died early. The thing was back then we didn't have any resources. We didn't have any computers. We didn't have any phones. We didn't have much support. But we had one another. And that's the thing about, I guess, if I shift for a second the focus on the treaty, you know, we fought for treaty rights at a time when there was nothing. And we fought and we relied heavily on one another, as we also relied heavily on one another, like during the Springbok tour, and I see, you know, family of those that we served with, you know, Pacifica brothers and sisters during those times at the point, He Taua, you know, on the tour, all of those things, on these actions. We were all involved, and we just had to back one another because we just knew some of this stuff is really simple to understand. Really, really simple. And you know that message, if it's safe, tested in Paris. Yes, and even you know, just equating that to the sewage going into the Hokianga. Well, if it's safe, drink it in Kirikiri. You know, the answer is, oh, hell no. You know, everybody says it's safe, but they won't do it. I guess if there's a message from the Waitangi thing, and what's happening now is there's so many treaty, what do you call it, educators? And some of them just fucking boring, Some of them are really boring. And some of them, you know, they're just ticking off credits for the kids. And the kids, you know, it's just like another subject. You know, math, science, treaty studies, blah. And that's the thing about action. Action is something you never forget, especially if you end up getting in a bit of trouble doing it. Yeah, you will never forget that, and you'll never forget the people you did it with. Like George, you know, trying to hang out the back of at the back of the march, and then getting squeezed up by the police, and then getting, you know, getting crack over the head from his own bishop because of it. But you never forget that, and you never forget the people you were with. So if there's anything about this here, from our days, I'd say try to make it alive, try to make it active. And this thing that Marco did an article on AUKUS, which I thought was a bit academic. But anyway, I think try and break it down so that kids can get it.
Yeah.
Try and break it down into action that kids can be involved in. So, you know, so that they can believe. And for, you know, Pacifica kids living in this country, they might find it particularly difficult because the Pacific's way back home where they may never have even been. And to understand that the whole of the Pacific is connected. You know, we're not distanced by the sea, we are connected by the sea. And to, just try to make, for the kids anyway, connections that are memorable. If there's not anything going on, you guys, your teachers get Marco to organise a march or something like that. In 2 years' time, is the 40th anniversary of the sinking of the Rainbow Warrior on this day, on the 10th of July. 10th of July. Is it 2 years' time? Yeah, 2 years' time. So, you know, organise so that the kids, you know, that their studies are about that and why it happened. And what the Rainbow Warrior was doing here and where it was going. And then, you know, talk to them about Pacifica people who are involved in it. Talk to them about the Māori, like one of our members of parliament went over, you know, Matt Rada. He went over on the frigate. You know, those sorts of things, they're great history. And then try to connect the kids to them so that it's not just an exercise of learning the text, regurgitating it, getting an A+, and that's it. You know, try and make it meaningful for them, and try and make the meaningfulness the thing that gives them the A+, not necessarily that exam.